Picture this. It's 1950. World War II ended just 5 years ago. You'd think the world's closest allies, like France and the United States, would be totally in sync, right? Well, behind the scenes, they were actually gearing up for a fight. Not on a battlefield, thank goodness, but in the highest court on the planet. So let's get into how these two friends ended up in a massive legal showdown.
It's a great question, isn't it? I mean, this wasn't some spy scandal or a border dispute. It was all about something that sounds kind of dry, but was actually a huge deal. Money, trade, and what happens when old promises crash right into a brand new world.
And trust me, this was no simple disagreement. This is the real deal official court paperwork from 1950. You can see it right here. France formally lodging a complaint against the United States at the International Court of Justice. The whole bureaucratic machine was kicking into high gear, pitting friend against friend.
So what on earth was this all about? Well, the heart of the conflict wasn't playing out in Paris or DC. It was all happening in the markets and ports of Morocco, and it was all about who really got to make the economic rules.
Yep, the whole thing really boiled down to one place, the French Protectorate of Morocco. After the war, France was desperately trying to get the local economy back on its feet. And to do that, they brought in a bunch of new regulations. But they hit a snag. A big American-sized snag.
France's argument was pretty simple. They were saying, hey America, we have new rules here. They claimed that U.S. citizens were acting like they were above the law, importing stuff without the proper licenses, demanding lower taxes at the border, and totally ignoring the currency rules that were supposed to keep the economy stable. For France, this was a massive headache that threatened their entire plan.
Now, to understand why the U.S. was digging in its heels, we have to jump in a time machine. And we're going way, way back, because the seeds of this 1950s fight were actually planted more than 100 years before.
This timeline just lays it all out so perfectly. Back in 1836, the U.S. made a deal directly with the Sultan of Morocco. Got some sweet perks for its citizens. But then, bam, 1912, the Treaty of Fez happens, and Morocco becomes a French protectorate. For decades, it was a messy situation that just kind of bubbled under the surface, until 1950, when it finally exploded into a full-blown court case.
So you have these two completely different points of view. The U.S. was basically saying, look, we have a signed treaty with Morocco. You, France, can't just come in and tell us it doesn't count anymore. Meanwhile, France was arguing, hello, times have changed, we're in charge of keeping things stable here, and your old treaty doesn't give you a free pass to wreck the economy.
So, just as both sides were rolling up their sleeves to argue about economics, the United States pulled a fast one. They played a legal card that was so clever it brought the entire case to a screeching halt.
And this right here, this is the moment it happened. This is the actual court notice from June 1951. It says the U.S. filed something called a preliminary objection. So instead of fighting about import taxes, the U.S. was suddenly challenging the very idea of the lawsuit itself. They basically hit the pause button on the whole thing.
And the American objection was honestly brilliant in its simplicity. They basically looked at the court and asked a very simple but very tricky question. Who are you? I mean, who is actually suing us here? Is it France, the country, or is it France acting as a representative for Morocco?
So what is a preliminary objection? Well, think of it this way. It's like in a chess match. Before you even move a single piece, you challenge whether your opponent is even allowed to be sitting at the table. You're not arguing the facts yet. You're arguing about the rules of the game itself.
So why did this matter so much? I mean, who cares, right? Well, it was a huge deal because the U.S. wanted to know who the court's final ruling would actually apply to. If France was only suing for itself, could that decision even be enforced in Morocco? It was a genius move that forced this really complicated colonial relationship out into the open for the whole world to see.
All right, so with that procedural detour out of the way, the case finally got to the main event, the economic showdown. And each side started to lay out its evidence, painting two very, very different pictures of what was going on. France's core legal argument was so, well, French. It was elegant and simple, and is captured perfectly in this quote from their paperwork. It basically says, quote, this court recognizes only the state as a litigant. Their point was, look, in international law, only countries can sue other countries. We are a country. We are the plaintiff. End of story.
The U.S., on the other hand, went for the nitty-gritty. They brought the receipts, literally. They weren't talking about abstract legal theory. They were showing the court actual customs forms for textiles and spare parts.
They had proof that import licenses for things like, get this, hog colorist serum were being denied. They were making the case that this was hurting real American businesses.
But France zoomed out. They were painting this much bigger global picture. They brought in charts showing how unstable the US dollar was, reports from the IMF, and big international treaties. They argued their rules weren't personal, they were a matter of force majeure, an unavoidable event. Basically, we had to do this because of the global economic crisis.
Okay, so a dusty old case about hog serum and import rules from over 70 years ago. Why should any of us care about this today? Well, because this legal duel actually left behind a fascinating legacy that's still super relevant.
For one, it proved that even the closest allies could have huge fights and settle them with lawyers instead of soldiers. It also became this perfect snapshot of the messy, complicated legal problems that pop up during decolonization. And maybe most importantly, it forced everyone to ask a question we still deal with. How long does an old treaty really last when the world it was written for doesn't exist anymore?
And that really is the question that hangs over all of this. When the ink on a century-old treaty meets the hard facts of a brand new world, who's right? Whose rules do you follow? It's a question that keeps coming up in international law, and there's still no easy answers.